Monday morning, investigators swarmed my floor. 18 of us under suspicion. Everyone panicked. I sat calmly and pulled the fiscal records from Q3. My colleague's theft was immediate. When the lead investigator read that file, his expression shifted to understanding. He closed the folder. He looked at me. He said, "Dr. Amara, these records. How did you catch this so quickly?" I didn't hesitate. "Because I've been keeping them this way for 12 years. He leaned back. I watched him understand something else entirely, not just that I had caught the theft, but that I was exactly the kind of person who would. The kind who notices. The kind who documents everything. The kind who was never going to let anything slip through again. The records cleared me. But more than that, they revealed me. If you've ever been told you would never amount to anything by someone who should have believed in you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. Because what happened next in my department, what unraveled in the weeks after those investigators left, what forced my family to finally see me, it all hinged on something they said to me 23 years earlier. Something I never forgot. Something I built my entire life to prove wrong. But to understand why that moment meant what it did, I have to take you back. 23 years back. I was 29 years old, sitting in my mother's kitchen on a Tuesday evening in March. The kitchen had avocado tile and a window that overlooked the neighbor's fence. I remember the tile because I was looking at it instead of looking at my mother's face when she told me I was wasting my time. My father was there too. My brother Marcus was there. They had called a family meeting about my future, which was another way of saying they had called a meeting to tell me I didn't have one. The medical school applications were denied again, my mother said. Not a question, a statement. She had been sitting at the kitchen table when the letters arrived that morning. I knew because she had left them open on the counter. 4 rejections. 4 cream-colored envelopes with that particular weight that rejection carries. My father didn't look at me, he looked at the space between us. "We can't keep funding this," he said. "It's not practical. You're almost 30. This was supposed to be settled by now." I had been working as a medical assistant at Brightwell General Hospital for 2 years. I was making $34,000 a year. I had saved $8,000 of it. My parents had been contributing to what they called my medical fund, a modest college fund they had started when I was born, which was supposed to cover some of the costs of medical school if I got in. It had grown to $19,000. They had told me 100 times that this money was mine, that it was set aside for my future, that they believed in my dream. They had lied. Or they had meant it once and changed their minds. The distinction no longer mattered. "We're going to need that money for other things," my mother said. "Marcus needs help with his house. Your father's business is tight. We can't just let it sit there while you send in applications to schools that don't want you." Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't have to, he already owned his house. It was a nice house in a nice neighborhood. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative. He made good money. Made the kind of money that fit into the family's idea of success. "How much?" I asked. "We're thinking we'll take out about $12,000, my father said. "Gradually, we'll pay you back when we can." I knew we both knew that would never happen. I knew they knew I knew it. "That's my money," I said. I was still looking at the tile. "It's money we put in for you," my mother said, and her voice had that particular edge it got when she was about to say something cruel and was coding it in the language of care. "But you have to be realistic about whether you're actually going to use it. Some people aren't meant to be doctors. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you, it's just fact. You should accept that and move on." I looked at her then. I looked at her face. She was waiting for me to cry or argue or beg her to reconsider. She was ready for that. What she was not ready for was what I actually did, which was to nod slowly and then excuse myself from the kitchen. I went to my bedroom. I was still living at home, in the house I had grown up in a room that still had the same yellow wallpaper it had had when I was 16. I sat on the edge of my bed. I pulled out the folder where I had been keeping copies of every medical school application I had sent out. There were applications to 32 schools. 32 rejections, most of them kind rejections, some of them form rejections, one of them a personalized note saying my clinical experience was solid, but my GPA in organic chemistry was holding me back. I knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to apply to medical school again. Not next year, not the year after. I was going to stop waiting for permission and start building something they couldn't take away from me, something that wouldn't require their money. Something that wouldn't require anyone's belief but my own. I took out a piece of paper from the notebook on my desk. I wrote down the name of the physician assistant program at Harrington State University. It was a master's degree program. It was rigorous. It took 3 years. It cost $48,000 total. I had no idea how I was going to pay for it, but I wrote down the name anyway. I folded the paper carefully. I put it in my wallet behind my driver's license. I kept it there for 6 years. The first year after that family meeting was the year I worked double shifts at Brightwell General. I was doing anything that would keep me out of my parents' house: clinical work, administrative work, even some work in the records department, where I learned the intricate geography of how medical information moved through an institution. I learned how hospitals tracked everything. I learned that nothing was ever truly lost if you knew how to look for it. At the end of that year, I had saved $19,000. I had also applied for a grant from the American Association of Physician Assistants. The grant was competitive. They gave out 40 of them every year to qualified applicants who demonstrated both financial need and exceptional clinical aptitude. I was honest in my application about what I wanted. I was also honest about why I couldn't get there alone. I was rejected from the grant. I remember receiving the email. I was sitting in the break room at Brightwell General. It was 3 in the afternoon. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. I read the rejection letter twice. They thanked me for my strong application. They noted my clinical skills. They said the pool of applicants this year had been particularly competitive. They wished me the best. I had the distinct physical sensation of falling, of something I had believed in collapsing underneath me. I had been so careful. I had saved so much. I had imagined this grant as the thing that would make it possible, as the gift that would let me say to my parents, "Look, I am exactly as capable as I said I was." I didn't need you. I called my friend David that night. David Castellano. He had been my supervisor at Brightwell General for 2 years. He was 53, a former ER nurse who had become the manager of clinical operations. He had seen me coming in early, staying late, documenting everything with a precision that made him slightly amused but consistently approving. He had also, without my directly asking him, helped me arrange my schedule so I could take prerequisite classes at the community college on Monday and Wednesday nights. The grant didn't go through, I told him when he picked up the phone. "When did you find out?" "3 hours ago. And you're already calling someone about it instead of catastrophizing alone," David said. "That's growth." Despite everything, I smiled. "Here's what I'm thinking," David said. "The university has partnerships with some of the major hospital systems. I know someone in HR at Mountain View Medical Center. They have a clinical fellowship program. It's not an actual PA program, but it's designed for people like you, people with strong clinical backgrounds who want to build toward advanced practice. It's 2 years, it's structured. It would strengthen your application to PA school for next time." "There is no next time," I said. "I can't afford it." "I can't afford any of it." "The fellowship is funded," David said. "You'd be an employee, benefits, salary, everything. But here's the thing, you'd have to move. It's in Springfield." 3 hours away. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "tell me how to apply." I moved to Springfield in August. I rented an apartment that was approximately the size of a generous closet. I started the fellowship at Mountain View Medical Center in September. For 2 years, I worked in the ER, in the urgent care clinic, in the orthopedic surgery department, in the medical records section. I learned the hospital from every angle. I learned how systems worked. I learned how to read between the lines of documentation. I learned what got caught and what slipped through. My parents didn't call much. My mother sent birthday cards with check marks where she had crossed out the printed message and written "Happy Birthday" in her narrow, precise handwriting. My brother Marcus didn't call at all. My father called once, maybe twice a year, usually on Sundays, usually just to ask what I was doing and listen to me explain that I was still working, still studying, still building towards something they had decided was impossible. At the end of the fellowship, Mountain View Medical Center offered me a position as a senior clinical coordinator. The salary was $42,000 a year. I could pay for the PA program now. I could pay for it without loans. I could pay for it without my family. I could pay for it as a person who had already proven, to herself if to no one else, that she could do exactly what she said she was going to do. But when I was filling out the application to the physician assistant program, I made a decision that surprised me. I decided not to tell my family I was applying. I decided not to tell them when I was accepted. I decided not to tell them when I graduated. I decided not to tell them when I took my board exams, passed them on the first attempt, and became certified as a physician assistant. What they didn't know couldn't be taken away from them. What they didn't know couldn't be diminished or reframed or absorbed into some story they told about luck or timing or help from someone else. It would just be mine. Entirely and completely mine. I completed the PA program in 2007. I was 35 years old. I had been building toward this in silence for 6 years. After my certification, I took a position at Riverside Medical Group, a specialty practice focused on complex surgical cases and trauma recovery. My title was Senior Physician Assistant in Trauma Surgery. I worked directly under Dr. Elena Vasquez, the group's founder and the most formidable surgeon I had ever met. Elena was 51 when I joined her practice. She was Argentine, trained in both the United States and Buenos Aires, and she had zero tolerance for anyone who didn't think like a problem solver. She hired me after a 30-minute interview where she asked me almost no standard questions, and instead had me walk her through 3 patient cases from my fellowship and explain what I would have done differently if I had been more senior. When I finished my third explanation, she said, "You think like someone who catches things before they become disasters. That's rare. Most people think like they're managing disasters after they've already happened. You won't do that here, but you also won't have to do it alone. You'll have me." I worked with Alina for 7 years. Those 7 years were the period where I became the thing my family had told me I would never be. I built a patient caseload. I created documentation protocols that other clinics in the medical group started adopting. I supervised 2 younger PAs who came in as staff. I published 2 papers on complications in post-surgical trauma recovery, the first with Alina as co-author, the second as lead author. Nobody in my family knew any of this. Not because I was hiding it, but because they had stopped asking. My mother called once a year on my birthday. My father had stopped calling altogether. Marcus sent a Christmas card. That was the entirety of our contact. There was a moment in 2013, 7 years into my work at Riverside Medical Group, when I could have told them. I was invited to present at a regional medical conference. The presentation was about post-surgical pain management in patients with complex trauma histories. It was original research. It was the kind of thing that gets published in journals that matter. I printed out the invitation. I sat at my kitchen table with it in front of me. I thought about calling my mother and telling her. I imagined the conversation. I imagined her surprise. I imagined her saying she was proud of me. I imagined it, and then I folded the invitation and put it in a drawer, and I never called her. Instead, I worked harder. I earned my certification as a trauma surgeon's assistant through an additional certification program. I took on more complex cases. I built a reputation in the regional medical community as someone who didn't miss details, who caught complications early, who documented everything with the kind of precision that made it impossible for anything to slip through the cracks. In 2014, when Alina decided to retire from active practice and transition to a consulting role, the medical group offered me the position of Director of Clinical Operations for Trauma Surgery. I was 42 years old. I had been working in medicine for 17 years. I had built my competence entirely outside the frame of my family's awareness. I moved into the office on the 3rd floor of Riverside Medical Group. It was a smaller office than Alina's had been, but it was mine. The nameplate on the door read Dr. Amara Chen, Director of Clinical Operations, Trauma Surgery. The doctor in front of my name was technically inaccurate. I had a master's degree, not a doctorate. But the medical group's formal titles included it. I had earned the right to look at that nameplate and believe it. I had one trusted colleague who knew the full shape of my history. Her name was Dr. Khalida Akafer. She was a physician in the internal medicine department at Riverside, 5 years older than me, also a woman who had come to her position through the kind of unconventional path that made you either bitter or extraordinarily careful. We had met at a hospital committee meeting, and over the course of several years, we had become the kind of friends who could tell the truth about things. "Your family," Khalida said to me once, over lunch in the hospital cafeteria. This was around 2015. We had been discussing a case where a family member of a patient had been aggressively dismissive of the patient's own medical knowledge. "Do they know who you've become?" "No," I said. "Are you going to tell them?" "I don't know," I said, which was the truth. "Because if you don't, eventually they'll find out some other way. And that's going to be worse. That's going to be a thing that happened to them rather than something you chose to tell them." I knew she was right. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for them to finally see me, because if they finally saw me, then I would have to see them too. I would have to acknowledge that the people who had taken my money and told me I was wasting my time were now living in a world where I had become exactly the thing they said was impossible. And I would have to decide whether that meant anything, whether I forgave them, whether I forgave myself for keeping it all a secret. So I didn't tell them. I went to work. I managed cases. I trained staff. I built systems that caught errors before they became patient harm. I was deeply, carefully, entirely unknown to the family I had come from. In 2018, my father had a stroke. It was a minor stroke. He recovered most of his physical function, but he was fragile afterward. My mother called me to tell me about it. This was the first time she had called with something other than a birthday greeting in more than a decade. I thought you should know, she said. In case you wanted to, I don't know, be in touch. I visited him in the hospital. He was in a general medical unit, not in my hospital system. I didn't tell him who I was beyond his daughter. I didn't mention my position. I didn't mention Riverside Medical Group or my title or the 17 years I had spent building competence in a field he had once told me I was incapable of entering. I sat with him for an hour. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was working in healthcare. He said that was good. He said he hoped I was happy. I said I was. And I was, but I was happy in a way that was separate from him. Separate from all of them. I had built my life entirely in the space they couldn't touch, and now that I had built it, I didn't need anything from them anymore. The last sign that something was about to change came on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2019, exactly 12 years after the family meeting in my mother's kitchen. I was in my office at Riverside Medical Group, reviewing referral paperwork for new trauma cases. One of the referrals had a familiar name on it: my mother. She was being referred to our trauma department for evaluation following a fall. The referral came from her primary care physician. The date of the appointment was 3 days away. I had no idea she was a patient in our system, no idea she had ever been referred to us, no idea that she was about to walk into my hospital, walk into my department, and finally see what I had become. I read the referral slip twice. Then I closed my email. I sat in my office in the quiet of the afternoon, and I realized that there was no more hiding. There was no more building in silence. There was no more separating the person I had become from the people I had come from. She was going to walk through those doors in 72 hours, and she had no idea. I called David Castellano that evening, not my old supervisor from Brightwell General, though his name had sat with me all these years. A different David, David Choi, the family law attorney I had retained 3 weeks earlier, the moment I saw my mother's name on that referral slip. I had known then that the collision was coming. I had known I needed to be ready. He picked up on the second ring. She's confirmed for Tuesday, I told him. The appointment? Yes, and she doesn't know who you are in that building. She has no idea. David was quiet for a moment. I could hear him opening a file. Then we moved forward with the filing. Monday morning. That gives you 1 day after the appointment before the documents are officially entered into the estate proceedings. The $19,000, I asked, documented as a parental gift with contractual repayment terms that were never fulfilled. You have bank statements from 2001 showing the initial deposit. You have statements showing the withdrawal. You have her signature on the family loan agreement from 2003. She co-signed it thinking it was a formality. It wasn't. I had spent the last 3 weeks gathering every piece of documentation that proved what had happened in that kitchen 12 years ago. Bank statements. The signed loan agreement my mother had dismissed as just paperwork when she asked me to sign it alongside her. Email correspondence from 2008, where my father had mentioned repaying some of the medical fund, only to stop mentioning it entirely by 2009. Photographs of the college fund ledger from my parents' accountant that I had requested and obtained legitimately through the estate inquiry process. There's more, David said. The house equity has been increasing. The property assessment from last year puts it at $840,000. Your parents' will, which they updated in 2016, after your father's stroke, lists you as a beneficiary in equal shares with your brother. That's $420,000 potential inheritance. And if I file the claim now, it freezes a portion of the estate. $420,000 is offset by the claim. The court would order mediation before any distribution. You'd be sitting in a room with your mother, your brother, possibly an estate attorney and a mediator. You'd present documentation of the theft. They'd have to respond. I understood what that meant. My mother would have to sit in a room and admit to taking money she had promised was mine. She would have to sit in a room and listen to me explain, calmly and with documentation, exactly what I had built without her. She would have to acknowledge that I had become something she spent 12 years trying to convince me was impossible. Sign it, I said. Monday morning. Amara, David said, and his voice had shifted, no longer the attorney's voice but something more careful. This is the thing that can't be undone. Once we file, your relationship with your family becomes a legal matter. It's never just a family matter again. It stopped being a family matter, I said, the moment she took my money and told me I was wasting my time. I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen, a different kitchen than my mother's with different tile and a different view, and I signed the first document electronically. David had set up a secure portal. I read through the filing one more time. Claim for return of misappropriated funds and inheritance offset. $23,000 with accrued interest over 23 years, plus the legal right to claim for the cost of my own advanced education, which would have been covered by the fund if they hadn't taken it. That number was $68,000. Total claim, $91,000 plus court costs. My mother was coming to my hospital on Tuesday. She would walk into the trauma department. She would check in. She would be evaluated by one of my staff. She would, at some point, be told that the director of clinical operations wanted to see her regarding her case. And she would walk into my office, into the room where I sat behind a desk with my name and my title on a plaque, and she would finally understand that I had spent the last 12 years becoming the kind of person who couldn't be dismissed. Monday morning, David Choi filed the documents with the family court. By Tuesday afternoon, my mother had been served notice. But that wasn't what broke her. The filing was institutional. The filing was procedural. The filing was something that happened in the margins of her day, a piece of paper that arrived from a law firm. What broke her was walking into my office. She arrived at Riverside Medical Group at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. I knew when she arrived because my administrative assistant, Patricia Gomez, informed me. Patricia had been with me for 5 years. She knew the situation. She knew who was coming and what it meant. Your mother is in the waiting area, Patricia said. She's asking for the trauma intake nurse. Send her to exam 3, I said, and tell her that Dr. Chen would like to see her after the initial evaluation. I used my title deliberately, Dr. Chen. I had earned the right to that designation, even if it was technically a courtesy. When my mother heard that, when she heard that the director of this department wanted to see her, she would start to understand. She walked into my office at 3:15. She was smaller than I remembered. That was my first thought, which surprised me. I had built her up so large in my mind, this woman who had taken my money and told me I would never be anything, but she was just a woman. She was 68 years old, she had gray hair pulled back in a clip. She was moving carefully because of the fall that had brought her into my hospital. She didn't recognize me at first. That was the second surprise. I was her daughter and she didn't recognize me. Mom, I said. I stood up from behind my desk. I kept my hands visible, I kept my face calm. It's Amara, I'm the director of this department. I watched the recognition move across her face in stages, first confusion, then a reordering of information, then a search backward through years of conversations where I had told her I was working in healthcare and she had accepted that as vague good news with no particular importance. You work here? She asked. I run this department, I said. Been here for 15 years, trauma surgery specialty. Before that, I was in clinical fellowship for 2 years. Before that, I completed my physician assistant certification, master's degree from Harrington State University, graduated 2007. She sat down very slowly in the chair across from my desk. She didn't look at me. She looked at the nameplate on my desk. She read it out loud, very quietly. Dr. Amara Chen, Director of Clinical Operations, Trauma Surgery. The PA certification, my mother said, still not looking at me. You never told us. I had nothing to tell you, I said. You had made a decision. I was going to build what I was going to build regardless of whether you decided to support it. Amara, we were just. She stopped. She was looking for a version of this conversation where she could explain, where she could minimize, where she could make herself the person who had been misunderstood. There was no version like that. There was only the truth. You took $19,000 from an account that belonged to me, I said. I kept my voice level. You told me it was set aside for my future. Then you took it because Marcus needed help with his house and your business was tight. You told me I was wasting my time trying to get into medical school. You told me some people weren't meant to be doctors. Then you withdrew my money and offered me the option of accepting this as the natural order of things. We were struggling, my mother said. You don't understand what it was like. I understand perfectly, I said. I was 29 years old, I was living in your house, I was working as a medical assistant, I was saving money, I was trying to build towards something, and you decided that your immediate need was more important than my future. She finally looked at me. Her face had gone very pale. What do you want from us? I want what was taken from me, I said. You're going to receive notice today from my attorney. An estate claim, $23,000 plus interest, plus $68,000 to cover the cost of my PA program, which you would have paid for if you hadn't taken my fund. Amara, we don't have that kind of money. Then the court will order mediation, I said. And you'll sit in a room with me and an attorney and a mediator. And you'll have to explain to a judge why you took a gift and called it a loan and never repaid it. You'll have to explain why you were comfortable taking money from your daughter to help your son buy a house. My mother's hands had gone still. They were resting on her lap and they weren't moving. I'm not telling you this to be cruel, I said. I'm telling you this because you need to understand that I have spent the last 12 years documenting everything. I keep records. I catch details. I don't let things slip through the cracks. I became the kind of person who would never again be in a position where someone could take something from me and tell me it was my fault for expecting them to keep their promise. Your father, my mother said quietly. He had that stroke. You took my money in 2003, I said. Your father had his stroke in 2018. You are confusing your timeline because you are looking for a version of this story where you were desperate and sympathetic. But the money you took was taken because Marcus needed a house. That's the version that's true. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know you were going to do all of this. Of course you didn't, I said. You decided I couldn't, so you stopped listening. You stopped paying attention. You took my future and used it for something else. And then you acted surprised when I built it anyway without you. There was a silence in the room. I could hear the hospital moving around us, machines beeping in other departments, people walking past my office door, the ordinary sound of an institution running exactly as it was supposed to. What happens now? My mother asked. You receive the notice from my attorney. You decide whether you want to mediate or go to court. You decide whether you want to sit in a room and admit what you did, or whether you want to make me prove it in front of a judge. You decide whether you want to contact me again, or whether you'd prefer to let your attorney handle everything going forward. She stood up. She was shaking slightly. I need to go home. Your initial evaluation paperwork is at the front desk, I said. Patricia will make sure you have all of it. Our recommendation is physical therapy 3 times a week for 6 weeks. I'll have Dr. Vasquez's office send you the information. Elena Vasquez, my mother asked. You worked with Elena Vasquez. I worked with her for 7 years, I said. She trained me in trauma surgery techniques. We published papers together. She was my mentor. My mother looked at me for a long moment. I watched her understanding deepen. Elena Vasquez was famous in certain medical circles. People knew her name. People had heard of her work. My mother had heard the name at some point in her life, probably at a dinner party or in a news article, and had absorbed it as the name of someone important and distant. The person who had trained under Elena Vasquez was her daughter. I should have believed you, my mother said. You should have, I agreed. She left my office. Patricia walked her to the elevator. I sat back down at my desk and opened my email. There was a message from David Choi confirming that the notice had been served at my mother's address. There was a message from Dr. Khalida Akafar saying, How are you? There was a message from one of my residents asking about a patient's imaging protocol. The world had shifted. The thing that I had built in silence had been revealed. And the institution, my hospital, my department, my authority was exactly as real as I had made it. My father called me 3 days later. It was the first time he had called me in more than a year. Your mother told me about your office, he said. Yes, I said. And the documents from the attorney. Yes. Amara, I don't understand how we got here. You got here by taking my money and telling me I was wasting my time, I said. I got here by building anyway. Those are 2 separate paths. They just happened to intersect in my office. We didn't understand what you were capable of, he said. I know, I said. That was the point. You stopped paying attention, so you stopped understanding. That was your choice. Can we mediate, he asked. Instead of court. If you want to, I said. That's between you and your attorney and David Choi. The mediation happened 6 weeks later. It took 3 sessions. My parents brought an estate attorney, Patricia Hoffman, from Hoffman and Associates. She was experienced and careful. She reviewed the documentation. She consulted with my parents. She advised them that going to court would be expensive and would likely result in a judgment larger than what I was claiming now. In the end, they agreed to pay $28,000 as a settlement. Not the full amount I had claimed. The legal system doesn't award compounds interest on family loans, and my parents' attorney was good enough to negotiate that down, but enough. Enough to cover the direct cost of the PA program I had paid for myself. Enough to make a statement. Enough to acknowledge that what happened was real and documentable and owed. The check arrived through David Choi's office. He forwarded it to my bank. I watched the deposit clear. $28,000. It was less than the time I had spent building my career in silence. It was less than the cost of the years I had spent wondering whether my family would ever see me. It was less than the value of the institutional authority I had built that allowed me to sit across from my mother and tell her the truth without needing her to validate it. But it was also something. It was acknowledgement. It was consequence. It was proof that the story I had told about what happened was real. My mother called me 3 months after the settlement was finalized. This was in July. It was the first time she had initiated a call to me since I was 29 years old. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "that I've been reading about your work. I found some of your papers online. The one about post-surgical pain management in trauma patients. I read it twice. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know that it was important." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know whether this was reconciliation, or whether this was my mother trying to rewrite the narrative one more time, trying to position herself as the person who had always believed in me and had just misunderstood the timeline. "Thank you for reading it," I said, which was true but also measured. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry that I told you that you couldn't do this. I'm sorry that I took your money. I'm sorry that I didn't see you for who you were." I thought about accepting the apology. I thought about telling her that it was okay, that I understood, that we could move forward now, but I didn't say any of those things. "I'm going to need some time," I said. "I'm not ready to move past this yet." "I understand," she said. "I'm not saying never," I said. "I'm saying not yet." "Okay," she said. After I hung up, I sat in my office at Riverside Medical Group. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just like the Tuesday afternoon 3 months earlier when she had walked into my department, not knowing who her daughter had become. The nameplate on my desk still read the same thing. The patients still came in with their trauma cases and their complications, and their need for someone who paid attention, who caught details, who had built a system that didn't let anything slip through the cracks. I had built all of this without them. I could continue to build all of this without them, but something had shifted. The silence was no longer necessary. The hiding was no longer necessary. They knew now. The world knew now. And I could decide from this point forward what kind of relationship I wanted to have with the people I had come from. And if there's anything this experience taught me, it's this. 1. The most powerful position you can occupy is the one you build for yourself in silence, while the people who doubted you are still convinced you haven't accomplished anything. Document every step. Make yourself undeniable. 2. Documentation isn't about revenge. It's about truth. It's about making sure that when the moment of confrontation comes, you have the institutional evidence to back up what you're saying. The records aren't weapons. They're confirmation that what happened was real. 3. Your identity is not defined by whether your family sees you or believes in you. It's defined by the work you do, the systems you build, the patients you serve, and the person you become when no one is watching. Everything else is secondary. Was I wrong to keep my entire career hidden from my family for 12 years? Tell me in the comments. Because I think about it sometimes, whether the silence was protection or punishment, whether I was building in strength or building in anger. I genuinely don't know, and I want to hear what you think. If this story gave you strength, hit that like button. It means more than you know.